The assistant manager thought he was removing a homeless woman from the most exclusive hotel in Manhattan, but within minutes, the entire marble lobby would clear for her in complete silence. Rainwater dripped from the hem of Evelyn Pierce's charcoal wool coat as she stepped through the revolving doors of the Grand Astor Hotel just after 7:40 p.m. The warmth of the lobby wrapped around the wealthy guests gathered beneath crystal chandeliers, but the moment people noticed her, the atmosphere shifted. Not loudly. Quietly. The kind of silence built from judgment. A woman near the piano glanced at Evelyn's wet boots and immediately tightened her grip around her champagne glass. A businessman standing beside the concierge subtly moved his designer suitcase farther away. The hotel smelled of polished cedar, expensive perfume, and old money, but Evelyn carried the cold scent of rain and city streets with her, and somehow that alone made people uncomfortable. She didn't seem to notice. Her silver blonde curls were damp around her temples, her canvas tote bag sagging heavily against her shoulder, and the thin scar near her chin caught the chandelier light as she approached the front desk with calm, measured steps. "Ma'am," a sharp voice interrupted before she even reached the counter. Assistant manager Daniel Mercer appeared from behind a marble column, already wearing the smile people used when they wanted to humiliate someone politely. Guests entering through the main lobby are usually checked in already. Several heads turned immediately. Evelyn stopped walking. Daniel's eyes swept over her coat, her worn boots, the fraying strap on her bag. His expression tightened. "If you're looking for shelter from the rain, there's a public cafe 2 blocks south." A few nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable smirks. Someone near the elevators let out a quiet laugh. Evelyn looked at him steadily, not angry, not embarrassed, just tired in a way that seemed older than the city itself. "I'm here for a meeting," she said softly. Daniel gave a short nod that carried no respect whatsoever. "Of course you are." More people were watching now. The pianist near the lounge slowed slightly. Sensing tension. A young receptionist behind the desk glanced nervously between Evelyn and Daniel but said nothing. "I'll need to ask you to leave the property," Daniel continued, his voice louder this time, making sure the surrounding guests could hear. "The Grand Astor maintains a private atmosphere for registered clientele." The words landed like a slap. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her tote bag. Across the lobby, a couple seated near the fireplace openly stared now, curiosity replacing discomfort. The humiliation had become entertainment. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled. "Please don't make this difficult." But Evelyn still didn't move. Instead, her eyes drifted slowly across the lobby. The chandeliers. The black marble pillars. The gold trim along the ceiling. Something unreadable flickered across her face, almost like grief. Then she asked a question so quietly most people nearly missed it. "Is the Founders Lounge still upstairs?" Daniel blinked once. Confusion crossed his face for only a second before irritation returned. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of game this is, but there is no public access to executive areas." The elderly concierge standing 30 feet away suddenly froze mid-step. His face lost color instantly. Evelyn finally looked toward him. And for the first time since entering the hotel, someone in the lobby looked genuinely afraid. The old concierge's silver tray slipped slightly in his hands before he caught it against his chest. The movement was small, almost invisible beneath the soft gold lighting of the lobby, but Evelyn noticed it immediately. So did the young receptionist behind the marble desk. Daniel Mercer turned toward the elderly man with annoyance already forming across his face. "Walter, do you know this woman?" The concierge did not answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn as though he had just seen someone return from the dead. Around them, conversations in the lobby softened into murmurs. The pianist near the lounge stopped completely this time. Even the sound of rain tapping against the tall glass windows suddenly felt louder. Walter swallowed carefully before stepping forward. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice almost trembling. "I did not know you were coming tonight." Daniel stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Evelyn gave the concierge a small nod, tired but polite. "Neither did I." The answer only deepened the confusion spreading across the room. Daniel let out a short laugh meant to regain control of the situation. "Walter, this guest was just leaving." But the old concierge did not move. In 40 years at the Grand Astor Hotel, Walter Green had greeted presidents, movie stars, foreign royalty, and billionaires whose names appeared on buildings across Manhattan. Yet the respect in his posture now exceeded all of them. Nearby guests were beginning to sense it too. The wealthy socialite seated near the fireplace lowered her wine glass slowly, her earlier amusement fading into uncertainty. Two bellhops near the entrance exchanged nervous glances. Something was changing in the room, though nobody understood what. Daniel's smile tightened. "Walter," he repeated more sharply, "please escort this woman outside before security gets involved." Walter finally turned toward him, and for the first time all evening, the old concierge looked offended. "Sir," he said carefully, "I would strongly advise against that." The room went still again. Daniel blinked. His face flushed with irritation as several guests openly watched him now. He could feel authority slipping, and men like Daniel Mercer did not lose control gracefully. "Advise against it," he repeated. "She is not a registered guest." Evelyn remained motionless beside the front desk, rainwater still glistening faintly along the shoulders of her coat. She looked less like someone fighting humiliation and more like someone quietly observing a building she no longer recognized. Walter lowered his voice. "Miss Pierce has every right to be here." Daniel laughed again, but the sound came out thinner this time. "And who exactly is Miss Pierce?" Before Walter could answer, the elevator at the far end of the lobby opened with a soft chime. 3 senior executives stepped out almost simultaneously, all wearing dark tailored suits and expressions sharpened by panic. One of them was the regional operations director, a man who almost never appeared on the lobby floor. Guests immediately recognized him. Staff straightened instinctively. Daniel's confidence returned for half a second as he stepped toward them. "Perfect timing," he began. "We have a situation involving," the director walked directly past him without slowing down. Every eye in the lobby followed as he approached Evelyn Pierce with visible tension in his face. Then, in complete silence, he lowered his head slightly and said words that drained the remaining color from Daniel Mercer's face. "Ms. Pierce, we were told you would never come back." Daniel Mercer opened his mouth twice before any sound came out. The confidence that had carried him across the marble floor only minutes earlier now seemed to drain visibly from his posture. Around the lobby, wealthy guests who had been pretending not to stare no longer bothered hiding their attention. Even the staff behind the front desk had stopped typing. The regional director stood facing Evelyn Pierce with the rigid caution of a man approaching something dangerous. "We attempted to contact the board," he continued carefully. "Nobody expected." His voice faded as Evelyn looked past him toward the grand staircase winding above the lobby. Her expression remained unreadable, but there was something haunting in the way her eyes moved across the hotel. Like someone revisiting a home after years away and finding strangers living inside it. Daniel forced a strained smile back onto his face. "I think there has been some misunderstanding," he said quickly. "This woman arrived without identification and refused to stop talking." The words came quietly from the regional director, but the effect was immediate. Daniel froze mid-sentence. A hush fell over the lobby so suddenly that the soft crackle from the fireplace became audible again. The young receptionist behind the desk stared at Daniel with widening eyes. Nobody had ever spoken to him that way publicly before. Evelyn adjusted the damp sleeve of her coat slightly, still calm, still exhausted, as though the tension surrounding her belonged to another world. "Entirely." "You asked Ms. Pierce to leave," the director asked without taking his eyes off Daniel. "Sir, I was protecting the environment for our guests." "Our guests?" The director repeated the phrase carefully, almost in disbelief. Then he looked around the lobby. At the chandeliers. At the polished black marble. At the towering floral arrangements imported weekly from Europe. Everything standing in this building exists because of her. A murmur spread instantly through the crowd. A woman near the elevators whispered something sharply to her husband. Two businessmen exchanged confused looks. The socialite by the fireplace slowly lowered her phone after secretly recording part of the confrontation. Daniel laughed nervously. "I am sorry, but who exactly is she?" Nobody answered immediately. That silence became worse than humiliation. It became fear. Walter the concierge looked down at the floor respectfully before speaking in a near whisper. Ms. Pierce designed the original Grand Astor guest standards in 1998. Several older employees nearby visibly stiffened. One of the bartenders turned pale. Daniel blinked hard. "That is impossible." "The founder was erased," Evelyn said softly. Every head turned toward her again. For the first time that evening, her voice carried emotion beneath it. Not anger. Something heavier. After the acquisition. The lobby seemed smaller suddenly. Tighter. The rain outside intensified against the glass windows while the piano remained silent in the corner. Daniel stared at Evelyn as though trying to rebuild reality around her appearance. The wet coat. The old boots. The tired face. None of it matched the image in his mind of power. And that was precisely the reason he had failed. A private elevator at the far end of the lobby opened again. This time, 3 members of the executive board stepped out alongside hotel legal counsel. Staff members immediately stepped aside. One of the board members, an older woman with silver hair and a navy suit, walked directly toward Evelyn with visible emotion gathering in her eyes. "You should have told us you were coming," she said quietly. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I wanted to see what the hotel had become when nobody thought I mattered anymore." No one in the lobby moved after that. Because deep down, every person standing there suddenly understood the same terrifying thing at once. The woman they had dismissed within seconds of seeing her had been quietly judging all of them from the moment she walked through the door. Daniel Mercer could feel the eyes of the entire lobby pressing into him now. Minutes earlier, those same people had watched him with admiration, the polished assistant manager controlling an uncomfortable situation with practiced authority. Now they watched him the way people watch a man standing too close to the edge of a roof without realizing it yet. His face had gone pale beneath the gold lobby lights. "There must be some mistake," he said carefully, forcing composure back into his voice. "I followed hotel protocol." The older board member turned toward him slowly. "No," she replied. "You followed assumptions." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Nearby guests lowered their voices instinctively. Even the wealthy couple near the fireplace who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact completely. The atmosphere in the lobby had transformed into something painfully fragile, as though one wrong sentence could shatter the entire room. Evelyn Pierce remained near the center of it all, still carrying rainwater on the shoulders of her charcoal coat, still looking less like a billionaire executive than a woman who had spent too many years carrying disappointment quietly. The contrast unsettled people. Daniel glanced around desperately, searching for support from the executives standing nearby, but nobody came to his defense. Not even the regional director. In luxury hospitality, hierarchy mattered more than truth, and hierarchy had already shifted. One of the younger employees behind the front desk suddenly looked horrified, as though replaying every second of the encounter in her mind. Evelyn noticed her immediately. "What is your name?" she asked softly. The young receptionist straightened instantly. "Claire, ma'am." "How long have you worked here, Claire?" "Almost 6 months." Evelyn gave a faint nod. "And did you feel comfortable interrupting your manager earlier?" Claire hesitated. The silence itself became the answer. Several employees looked down immediately. Daniel's jaw tightened. With respect, he interrupted, My staff understands standards are necessary to protect the guest experience. Evelyn finally looked directly at him again. There was no anger in her expression. That somehow made it worse. The guest experience, she repeated quietly. Do you know why I created the original Grand Astor standards? Daniel said nothing. The entire lobby seemed to lean toward her voice. Outside, lightning flashed faintly across the rain-soaked windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Because 30 years ago, Evelyn continued, I watched my mother get removed from a hotel lobby while she was waiting for my father to return from surgery. A hush spread instantly. Even the executives looked stunned. She looked tired, Evelyn said. She looked poor. And nobody bothered asking who she was before humiliating her in public. The old concierge lowered his eyes slowly. He remembered. Daniel swallowed hard. Miss Pierce, I did not know, exactly. Her voice remained calm, but something inside the room shifted permanently at that moment. You did not know me. And that was enough for you to decide my value. No one moved. No one even touched their drinks anymore. The social pressure that had once isolated Evelyn had now turned completely around, crushing Daniel beneath the same public judgment he had confidently used against her. Then another change rippled through the lobby. Two security officers who had been approaching earlier quietly stepped backward instead. Staff members straightened. Guests moved subtly away from the center floor. Without a single command being spoken aloud, the entire lobby began clearing a path around Evelyn Pierce. And for the first time that evening, Daniel Mercer finally understood the horrifying difference between authority that comes from a job title and authority that changes the behavior of an entire room without raising its voice. The marble lobby had become so quiet that the soft ticking of the antique clock above the concierge desk echoed through the room. Nobody seemed willing to break the silence first. Guests who had once stood confidently with cocktails and luxury shopping bags now kept glancing at Evelyn Pierce with uneasy fascination, as though trying to understand how someone who looked so ordinary could suddenly hold the emotional gravity of the entire hotel. Daniel Mercer felt sweat gathering beneath the collar of his tailored suit. He had spent years mastering appearances. The perfect smile. The perfect tone. The perfect posture for wealthy guests. But none of those things were helping him now. Because the woman standing in front of him understood something far more dangerous than luxury. She understood people. Evelyn slowly removed one rain-damp glove and rested it against the marble reception desk. Her fingers paused briefly over the polished stone surface. This was originally walnut, she said quietly. The regional director nodded immediately. It was changed during the renovation in 2017. Evelyn gave the faintest smile, though sadness lingered behind it. Walnut felt warmer. Nobody dared interrupt her. The older board member standing nearby folded her hands carefully. The investors wanted a more modern image. Evelyn looked around the lobby again. Modern, she repeated softly, almost to herself. Her eyes moved across the towering gold columns, the expensive floral displays, the oversized crystal chandeliers. It used to feel human in here. The sentence settled heavily into the room. Several employees looked visibly uncomfortable now, especially older staff members who remembered the hotel before the corporate takeover years earlier. Daniel attempted one final recovery. Ms. Pierce, I truly apologize if my actions seemed disrespectful. My responsibility is maintaining standards for all guests equally. Evelyn turned toward him fully for the first time since entering the hotel. Her steady blue-gray eyes held his without effort. Equally, she asked. Daniel hesitated. It was a small pause, barely a second long, but everyone noticed it. Evelyn continued gently. You evaluated me before I spoke 10 words. Nobody breathed. You saw wet boots, she said. A tired coat. Gray hair. No jewelry. And your mind filled in the rest. Daniel looked away first. That single movement told the entire lobby who had lost control. Near the elevators, the socialite who had mocked Evelyn earlier quietly slipped her phone into her purse, suddenly embarrassed by her own behavior. The young receptionist Claire stood completely still behind the desk, absorbing every word like a lesson she would never forget. Then Evelyn did something nobody expected. She reached into her worn canvas tote bag and carefully removed a faded leather folder. The edges were weathered with age. Walter the concierge inhaled sharply the moment he saw it. "My God," he whispered under his breath. Evelyn placed the folder gently onto the marble counter. Inside were original sketches. Hand-drawn lobby layouts. Guest experience notes written in blue ink. Architectural revisions. The first vision of the Grand Astor Hotel from nearly 3 decades earlier. Several executives immediately stepped closer. One board member visibly lost composure seeing the pages. "You still kept them?" she asked quietly. Evelyn nodded once. "I almost threw them away after they removed my name." The room seemed to tighten around those words. Removed my name. Not retired. Not sold. Removed. Daniel stared at the papers in disbelief. The realization spreading across his face now was far worse than embarrassment. It was the horrifying understanding that he had publicly humiliated the very soul of the institution he built his career worshipping. And judging by the expressions around the lobby, everyone else had realized it too. For nearly 20 seconds, nobody in the lobby spoke. The only sound came from rain sliding down the massive glass windows overlooking the avenue outside and the faint hum of the chandelier lights above. Evelyn Pierce stood beside the marble reception desk with the faded leather folder resting open before her, exposing the original soul of the hotel to people who had only ever known its polished corporate version. The executives surrounding her no longer looked powerful. They looked nervous. One of the board members carefully lifted a sketch from the folder with both hands, almost reverently. "This is the original hospitality creed," she murmured. "I thought these documents were destroyed." Evelyn's expression darkened slightly. That was the intention. Daniel Mercer looked as though the ground beneath him had shifted out of place. Every instinct inside him wanted to regain control, but the room itself no longer belonged to him. Even the guests sensed it. Wealthy travelers who had spent their lives around status suddenly became strangely quiet, because real influence had entered the room, and it did not look anything like they expected. Claire, the young receptionist, glanced toward Evelyn again. "Why did they remove your name?" she asked softly before realizing she had spoken aloud. Several executives stiffened immediately. The question hung in the air like something dangerous. Evelyn looked at the young woman for a long moment. "Because I refused to approve changes that treated people differently based on how they looked." Nobody moved after that. Daniel's face tightened visibly. Across the lobby, one of the bartenders slowly looked down in shame. A wealthy older guest seated near the fireplace removed his glasses quietly, staring at Evelyn with a completely different expression now. Respect had replaced curiosity. The regional director cleared his throat carefully. The acquisition board believed exclusivity was necessary for growth. Evelyn nodded faintly. Exclusivity is not the same thing as dignity. The sentence spread through the room with brutal precision. Several employees exchanged glances they would remember for years. Daniel tried to speak again. "Ms. Pierce, I assure you the Grand Astor remains one of the most respected luxury properties in the country." Evelyn turned toward him gently. "Luxury is easy," she said. "Humanity is harder." The words cut deeper because they were true. No shouting. No humiliation. Just truth placed carefully into silence. Then another shift happened. More executives began arriving from the private elevator. Senior hospitality directors. Corporate legal advisors. Even 2 members of ownership rarely seen in public. The lobby staff straightened instantly at the sight of them. One security guard quietly removed his earpiece altogether. Guests stepped farther aside without being asked. The social hierarchy of the room had completely collapsed and rebuilt itself around Evelyn Pierce. Daniel noticed it too. Nobody was looking at him anymore. The authority he had worn so confidently earlier now felt artificial under the weight of genuine respect gathering around Evelyn without effort. Walter the concierge slowly approached her with something folded carefully in his hands. It was an old black and white photograph. The original opening night of the Grand Astor Hotel nearly 30 years earlier. Younger faces. Simpler uniforms. Warm smiles. And standing near the center beside the hotel entrance was a younger Evelyn Pierce in a dark coat, her silver blonde curls shorter than, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors while employees applauded around her. Claire stared at the photograph in disbelief. "That was you?" Evelyn looked down at the image quietly. "Before they decided the story sounded better without me." A painful silence swept through the lobby again. Because suddenly everyone understood the real reason she came back tonight. Not for revenge. Not for power. She came to see whether the place she once built on dignity still deserved to carry her vision at all. The rain outside had slowed to a soft silver drizzle by the time the chairman of the ownership group finally arrived. His black sedan had barely stopped beneath the hotel awning before staff rushed to open the doors. Through the towering glass windows, several guests watched him enter with visible confusion. Men like Arthur Calloway did not come to the lobby floor unless something serious had happened. At 72, the chairman carried the calm gravity of old wealth, but the moment he stepped inside and saw Evelyn Pierce standing near the reception desk, his expression changed completely. He stopped walking. For one brief second, the most powerful man connected to the Grand Astor Hotel looked almost ashamed. The executives surrounding Evelyn immediately stepped aside. Nobody instructed them to. They simply did. Arthur approached slowly across the marble floor while the entire lobby watched in. Silence. Daniel Mercer stood frozen near the front desk, suddenly aware that he no longer belonged at the center of the room. "Evelyn," Arthur said quietly. Her eyes lifted toward him. "Arthur." The familiarity between them unsettled everyone even further. This was not the language of executives meeting a former employee. This sounded older. Personal. The chairman glanced at the faded architectural sketches resting on the marble counter, then at the old photograph Walter still held carefully in his hands. His shoulders lowered slightly. "You kept them." Evelyn answered softly. "Someone had to." No one spoke after that. Even the sound of luggage wheels across the lobby had disappeared. Guests stood still beneath the chandeliers like witnesses inside a courtroom where nobody knew the verdict yet. Arthur looked around slowly at the hotel surrounding them. The gold accents. The imported stone. The towering floral displays. "You were right," he admitted finally. Several executives looked stunned hearing those words spoken publicly. "About what?" Claire asked before she could stop herself. Arthur gave a tired smile without humor. That luxury built without dignity eventually becomes performance. The sentence landed heavily across the room. Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. He understood now that the conversation unfolding in front of him was not about one embarrassing mistake tonight. It was about years of moral erosion hidden beneath polished marble and 5-star reviews. Evelyn looked toward the fireplace lounge where wealthy guests still sat awkwardly pretending not to listen. "When I built this hotel," she said quietly, "I wanted people to feel relief the moment they walked through those doors." Her eyes drifted toward the revolving entrance where rainwater still glistened faintly on the floor from her arrival earlier. Not fear of being judged. Claire swallowed hard behind the desk. The young receptionist suddenly remembered the exact look on Evelyn's face when Daniel first stopped her from approaching the counter. It had not been anger. It had been disappointment. Arthur turned slowly toward Daniel Mercer at last. The assistant manager visibly stiffened. "Did you ask her to leave this hotel?" he asked calmly. Daniel's voice nearly failed him. I believed I was protecting the guest environment. Arthur nodded once. And yet the entire atmosphere of this lobby improved the moment she stayed. A painful silence followed. Several guests quietly looked away. The socialite near the fireplace slowly stood and left without saying a word, unable to remain under the weight of what she had participated in earlier. Then something happened that no training manual could have prepared Daniel for. Arthur Calloway stepped aside completely and gestured toward the center of the lobby with quiet respect. The Grand Astor is still yours whenever you walk through these doors. And just like that, every employee, every executive, every guest in the room instinctively moved farther back, clearing the entire marble lobby around Evelyn Pierce as though the building itself finally remembered who she was. No one seemed willing to step back into the center of the lobby after that. The wide marble floor surrounding Evelyn Pierce remained completely open, as though an invisible boundary had formed around her presence. Employees stood straighter. Guests lowered their voices instinctively. Even the lighting felt different somehow, softer against the gold walls and polished black stone. Evelyn looked around slowly at the people surrounding her. Some appeared embarrassed. Others looked fascinated. A few older staff members seemed emotional, their expressions carrying the weight of memories that younger employees could not understand. Claire watched everything from behind the front desk with wide uncertain eyes. She had started the evening believing luxury meant expensive clothing, confident posture, and people who belonged in rooms like this. But standing there now, she realized the most powerful person in the building was wearing rain-damp boots and carrying a worn canvas bag. Arthur Calloway glanced toward the executives gathered near the elevators. "Clear the boardroom," he said quietly. "Tonight." Several directors immediately moved to obey. Evelyn lifted a hand gently before anyone could leave. "No," the single word stopped everyone. Arthur looked surprised. "Evelyn, after what happened tonight, we should discuss restoring your position formally." She shook her head slowly. "I did not come back for a title." Her gaze drifted toward the revolving entrance again where another wave of rain slid across the Manhattan streets outside. "I came back because I needed to know whether kindness still existed in this building when nobody thought I was important." Silence swept through the room once more. The answer to that question hung painfully in the air for everyone present. Daniel Mercer looked as though he wanted to disappear entirely. The humiliation he once directed outward had folded back onto him in front of the same wealthy audience he spent years trying to impress. Yet Evelyn never once insulted him. That somehow made the shame worse. Walter the concierge stepped closer carefully. "Ms. Pierce," he said softly, "there are still people here who remember what this place used to stand for." Evelyn looked at the old man warmly. "I know." Arthur lowered his voice. "The investors buried your contributions after the merger because they believed the brand tested better with a corporate founder story." Claire frowned behind the desk. "They erased her on purpose?" One of the legal advisors shifted uncomfortably. Arthur answered quietly. "They thought her vision sounded too emotional for modern luxury marketing." Evelyn gave a faint smile at that, though sadness lingered behind it. "Back then they said guests wanted exclusivity more than warmth." She looked around the lobby slowly. "But people never forget how you make them feel." The sentence settled deeply into everyone listening. Near the fireplace lounge, an older woman who had been staying silent all evening suddenly stood up from her chair. She walked slowly toward Evelyn carrying a cane in one hand and stopped a few feet away. 27 years ago, the woman said softly, "You sat with my daughter in this lobby after she had a panic attack before her wedding reception upstairs." Evelyn's expression shifted slightly, searching her memory. Then recognition appeared. "Emily," she whispered. Tears gathered in the older woman's eyes. "You stayed with her." For almost an hour because she was afraid to walk back into the ballroom. Several guests nearby looked stunned hearing this. The woman smiled faintly through emotion. "She still talks about you." Evelyn lowered her eyes quietly for a moment. And in that instant, the entire lobby understood something the executives and investors had failed to measure for decades. The true legacy of the Grand Astor Hotel had never been marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It was the quiet dignity one woman built into the hearts of strangers when nobody else was paying attention. The lobby remained unusually quiet long after the older woman returned slowly to her seat beside the fireplace. Something about her story lingered in the air beneath the chandelier light, settling into people more deeply than anyone expected. Guests who had arrived thinking about reservations, business dinners, and luxury suites now stood motionless with entirely different thoughts moving through their minds. Evelyn Pierce looked around the Grand Astor one final time. The gold trim reflected softly across the marble floors. Rain still shimmered against the windows overlooking the city outside. Somewhere deeper in the hotel, silverware clinked faintly from the restaurant upstairs, but down in the lobby nobody seemed eager to speak too loudly anymore. Arthur Calloway stepped beside her quietly. "You could change everything back if you wanted to," he said. Several executives lowered their eyes immediately. They all knew he meant it. Evelyn could have reclaimed her position with a single sentence. She could have demanded apologies, resignations, headlines, control. Instead, she reached down and closed the faded leather folder carefully with both hands. "No," she said softly. "Buildings survive." Her eyes drifted toward the employees standing near the front desk. Claire. Walter. The bartenders. The bellhops. Even Daniel Mercer, still standing silently beneath the crushing weight of his own embarrassment. People are the difficult part. Daniel finally stepped forward then, his voice rougher than before. "Ms. Pierce," he struggled for the right words, but they refused to come easily now that performance no longer worked. "I am sorry." The apology sounded small in the enormous lobby. Honest, but painfully late. Evelyn studied him quietly for a moment. "I believe you are," she answered. No anger. No humiliation returned to him. Just truth. Somehow that mercy affected him more than punishment would have. Daniel lowered his eyes completely. Claire watched the exchange with visible emotion gathering behind her composure. Earlier that evening she had admired Daniel's confidence and authority. Now she understood how easily confidence could become cruelty when dignity depended on appearances. Evelyn slipped the old photograph Walter had shown her back into the leather folder. Her fingers lingered briefly over the younger version of herself smiling beside employees who had once believed hospitality meant kindness before status. "Do you know what the strangest part is?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. Arthur looked at her carefully. Evelyn gave the faintest smile. "I was nervous before I walked through those doors tonight." The admission surprised everyone. "Why?" Claire asked softly. Evelyn looked toward the revolving entrance where rain-soaked taxis continued moving through the Manhattan night outside. "Because after enough years," she said, "even the people who built a place begin wondering whether they still belong there." No one in the lobby seemed able to answer that. The silence that followed felt deeply human. Not awkward. Not fearful. Just honest. Walter moved quickly to open the front doors for her as she approached. The cold city air swept gently into the warm lobby again. Before stepping outside, Evelyn paused and turned back one last time. Her tired blue-gray eyes moved across the employees, the executives, the guests standing beneath the chandeliers. "Take care of people when they look least impressive," she said softly. "That is when they remember you forever." Then she stepped back into the rain. Nobody rushed to fill the silence after she left. The lobby remained still for several long moments, as though the building itself had been forced to confront what it had slowly become over the years. And somewhere among the marble floors, expensive suits, and quiet reflections in the glass, more than one person standing there began remembering a moment in their own life when someone judged them too quickly, or when they had done the same to somebody else.